You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. When the news of R. Kelly's indictment broke, the reaction from Sony Records, which is the very label that had managed the distribution of his music for years, was not just swift, it was telling.
Sony Music has dropped R. Kelly from its roster of artists. Kelly is facing numerous allegations of sexual
young women and girls at the hands of the R&B singer. And now many are demanding R. Kelly's record label RCA kick him to the curb.
Without hesitation, Sony made the decision to sever ties with R. Kelly, dropping him as if he were disposable. No trial had yet taken place, no verdict had been delivered, no legal conclusion had been reached. And yet Sony acted with a certainty that made many observers pause and question, why would a major corporation move so quickly with so much confidence, as if they already knew what the outcome of the case would be? This wasn't just any artist we're talking about. This was R. Kelly, the king of R&B. A man whose music had generated immense wealth for Sony over decades. From platinum-selling albums to chart-topping singles, R. Kelly was one of the most profitable artists Sony had ever partnered with. But when things got hot, Sony didn't stand by him. They didn't even have the will to wait for the judicial system to do its work. They dropped him like a stone, and they did it with precision, timing and readiness that raised more than a few eyebrows. What's even more suspicious is how Sony's response starkly contrasted with the reaction from other entities involved in R. Kelly's music. YouTube, for example, didn't rush to delete his content. Streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, and others held off on making any decisive move until the legal system had spoken. Even social media platforms, which are often quick to silence anyone accused of wrongdoing, were more cautious. But not Sony. They acted like a company that wasn't reacting. They were executing. And that's where the questions begin to mount. Many have since argued that Sony's actions weren't just a business decision. Critics and observers alike began to ask, did Sony know something the rest of the world didn't? Were they tipped off about how things would eventually unfold? Or worse still, were they part of the plan? There is a growing belief that Sony may have had a vested interest in orchestrating the fall of R. Kelly. Not in the legal sense, but in the economic sense. Why? Because R. Kelly's music catalog, which is his whole life's work, is an absolute goldmine. And if R. Kelly were to be imprisoned for years or even decades, the value of that catalog becomes all the more exploitable by those who hold partial rights to it. With R. Kelly out of the way, silenced and unable to tour, to perform, or to profit from his work, the scales tip heavily in favor of the corporations who once stood behind him. This belief gained more traction after a peculiar incident at Sony's offices, one that didn't quite make the headlines in the way it should have. Around the time the calls to mute R. Kelly were gaining momentum, a group of activists aligned with the Mute R. Kelly campaign staged a protest at Sony's office. They arrived with chants, signs, and songs directed against the R&B icon, demanding that Sony cut ties with him. But what made this protest unusual was not the protest itself. It was the reception they received at Sony offices. Instead of security being called to escort them off the premises, instead of being treated as unwelcome demonstrators at a corporate office, these protesters were welcomed. Literally welcomed with open arms. Staff at Sony seemed not just tolerant but prepared. Empty boxes were already waiting and set aside to receive their numerous petitions. A representative of Sony, apparently assigned for the sole purpose of handling the activists, came out and accepted their demands without any sort of confrontation or resistance. It was a scene more reminiscent of a planned PR event than a grassroots protest. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't unexpected. It in fact looked choreographed. It looked like Sony knew the activists were coming, and not just that, they welcomed them like partners in a shared mission to destroy the R&B king. It's almost as if the protest was part of an internal project already greenlit by the corporation itself. And that's where the theory takes root: Sony didn't just respond to pressure from activists. They helped create that pressure. They needed a public excuse to do what they had already decided behind closed doors, and that is to drop R. Kelly and begin moving in on his music legacy with impunity. Let's put this into context. R. Kelly's music catalog is vast, timeless and valuable. It spans decades of influence and creativity. It includes generational hits, classic anthems and soulful masterpieces that defined entire eras of R&B. And like many artists before him, R. Kelly was fighting to retain control over that catalog. That control or that ownership translates directly to financial power. But if R. Kelly were to be permanently disgraced and imprisoned, his ability to fight for that control dissolves. The catalog becomes ripe for acquisition at a fraction of its true value. Sound familiar? This isn't the first time a major corporation has been accused of turning on a legendary black artist in pursuit of their music rights. The parallels to what happened with Michael Jackson are chilling. Jackson too had amassed an extremely valuable catalog not just of his own work, but of other major artists. And he too found himself entangled in controversies, accusations and legal nightmares that ultimately left him vulnerable. In the end, powerful interests gained more control over his music than ever before. The same pattern seems to be playing out with R. Kelly. And here's where the accusations grow louder. Sony, according to some critics, is not just reacting to a legal situation. They're playing a long game. One that involves leveraging public outrage, manufacturing consent through sponsored activism, and using government prosecution as a proxy weapon. The government becomes the machinery. The activist campaigns become the justification. And Sony walks away clean with the rights to R. Kelly's music, with the profits and with no public accountability for what they may have orchestrated from behind the curtain. People are asking hard questions. Why did Sony act with such urgency, as if they were waiting for a cue? And why did they receive anti-R. Kelly activists as if they were part of an internal rollout? Why was a company so quick to turn on an artist who brought them billions of dollars? And why is it that every time a black musical genius starts to move toward full independence and toward owning their catalog, scandal and imprisonment follow? These aren't just questions of conspiracy. These are questions of pattern. And when you examine those patterns, what you see is deeply unsettling. He may be a man caught in a much bigger operation, one that spans boardrooms, courtrooms and public opinion campaigns. And the saddest part of all of this is that very few people are willing to speak out. The few that do are silenced, shamed or dismissed. Because to defend R. Kelly even by simply pointing out inconsistencies and ulterior motives is to go against a narrative that has been pushed with relentless force. But someone has to say it. Someone has to say that Sony's behavior was not only suspicious but also premeditated. Someone has to say that the way the activists were received felt more like a staged handoff than a protest. Someone has to say that the real goal here might not be justice but control. Control over R. Kelly's legacy, his royalties and his unmatched contribution to music history. If Sony truly believed in due process, they would have waited. If they truly respected the man who made them a fortune, they would have held a line until the courts delivered a verdict. But they didn't. They moved fast and they did so without hesitation. And that's why many now believe Sony wasn't reacting to R. Kelly's indictment. They were initiating the final act of a larger plan. A plan to remove him from the music industry entirely and to use the justice system as a tool of removal, and to reclaim his music for cheap while avoiding the massive payouts he would be owed as a free and powerful man. Again, let's remember, this isn't just about R. Kelly. It's about the dangerous precedent being set. A precedent where corporations can use public outcry as cover, where they can back activist movements in secret, and where they can benefit from legal tragedies they may have helped set in motion. So ask yourself, who really benefits from R. Kelly's downfall? Certainly not the victims who received a few $100,000. But the companies. The same companies who profited from him at his peak, and that now stand to profit even more in his absence. And at the top of that list is Sony. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say? To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.